This episode brought to you by Discovery Bank. Ready to experience the future of banking now? Get on board. Discovery Bank Limited is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply. So, you think you want to be a CEO?
You have to be one of those people that listens to the world. So you're able to receive signals that tell you that maybe you need to tack or you need to change directions. People use the truism or the cliche, strong opinions weakly held.
The power, the status, the money.
There are a relatively small number of people who are on the absolutely deep-seated cutting edge of this.
Is it all it's cracked up to be?
If we had a really, really fantastic, well-trained model that could be synthesized down to an education model that runs on a mobile phone, that could be a really positive AI tutor in classrooms where there are 80 kids to a teacher, like, honestly, that's life-changing for our African children.
John Lazar studied comp sci at Wits long before Steve Jobs put personal in front of computer. He won a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford and went on to become the chief executive and later chairman of a company called Metaswitch, a firm at the forefront of voice over IP. Today, he's the outgoing chairman of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, a charity that develops low-cost computers and has a mission to democratize computer science. He's also general partner of Enza Capital, a firm which, amongst other things, invests in promising British and African startups, particularly those with an AI bent. He was knighted in 2025 for his services in engineering and technology, massively respected leader in his field, and is president of the Royal Academy of Engineering. So, Sir John Lazar, what does it take to be a CEO?
I think there's lots of different ways you can come at it. I think the obvious one that most CEOs will point to is it does take an extraordinary amount of resilience. So you as a CEO will just deal with an enormous amount of perturbation and uncertainty, and your ability to really, really deal with uncertainty and manage your way through it and inspire other people to manage their way through it is just a key determinant. So I think the resilience one, and I don't think you know this till you're in the job, because, you know, people say it's lonely at the top and blah, blah, blah. There is this moment where you suddenly realize that you thought you had a strategy, something just changed. As a company, you need to work your way through it. And despite all the help and support that you get, ultimately you are the person who's in charge and has to sign off on the decision. And sometimes when things are not going as well as they might, you have to be the person who wakes up in the morning and goes, I can still do this, and I need to find the energy and the wherewithal to inspire other people to support me to do it. So I think the resilience one is really, really important. And I mentioned uncertainty. I think the other absolutely key determinant is, I've always thought of it like this. So if you've got an organization where you have layers of management, and then you have, as in our case at Metaswitch, a very large engineering team, what you have to do is cope with uncertainty and risk and project stability and certainty downwards, so that everybody else, even in the midst of all of this uncertainty, and I think at each layer in the organization, people have the ability to cope with different levels of uncertainty. So I always thought about it like this, which is I have this amazingly powerful and adept engineering team. I need them to feel very comfortable. They know what they're doing. They have a plan. They're working towards that plan. So for them, there was a really quite strong amount of certainty. And then as you work your way up the organization towards the top, your ability to cope with risk and uncertainty is sort of inversely proportional to where you are on the management stack. So I'd start with those two. I think the best leaders combine a very, very strong vision and view of the world and kind of passion for what they're trying to do. So there's kind of really like profound ambition about the problem that they're trying to solve. Most CEOs are just ambitious people. They believe they can change the world. That's what they want to do. And they have a strong view of like the strategy and the vision around that. But if you only have that and you don't listen very well and you don't receive input from the world, you'll just like run into a wall. So it's this kind of interesting mix of profound passion about an ambition you believe that you can achieve. And then you have to be one of the people who receives feedback really well. That's not just feedback from people around you, but also you have to be one of those people that listens to the world. So you're able to receive signals that tell you that maybe you need to tack or you need to change direction. So people use the truism or the cliche, strong opinions, weakly held. I don't think that quite describes it, but I think it's a mix of those. And it was very interesting at MetaSwitch because we had a couple of cases where I would go back to the organization and go, okay, we need to do this now. And everybody would go, but that's different from what we've been doing the last 5 years. And 5 years ago, you said to us, like, we need to do this other thing. And I'm going, no, I completely understand that. And I know that's true, but the world just changed. So it's this ability to actually receive input.
It's a really important part of the conversation is leading change and leading adaptability and being sufficiently wise and agile as to when it's a red herring and when it's a trend, or maybe even leading the trend. We'll get there in a moment. You said at the beginning it's about resilience and it's about coping with uncertainty. In technology in particular, I wonder if there are not two streams of uncertainty. There's the external stream, the stuff over which you have absolutely zero control, the geopolitics, the climate, economies, whatever that might be. Every single CEO has that uncertainty with which they need to contend, and that is enough for most people. In tech, you're dealing with the uncertainty of probably the most rapidly evolving industry that has ever been created, which brings its own dynamism to the point of your techies who say to you, but hold on a second, you're changing your mind after 5 years. It's called evolution or die, isn't it? It's very Darwinian in its way.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think companies that are being built from the ground up with AI right now are in a very, very different place from the way we would have thought about building an organization 10 years ago. I mean, I'll give you a very good example. There's a couple of companies in our Enza Capital portfolio where they are AI native companies. They're delivering AI solutions, but also the way they're building internally is a very, very explicit decision that certain functions in the company will be AI. They almost name them, and then they recruit brilliant people to work with those AI agents. So your organization now becomes a conglomeration of people and AI agents, and you're not just fitting AI into existing workflows, you're completely reshaping workflows for this new world. And I do think it allows you to move at a pace and potentially with less capital if you're not reliant on too much hardware at just extraordinary pace. When we were at MetaSwitch, we were very, very thoughtful about our kind of product development process. And it was always an interesting mix. There are some products where, if you're building hardware, you have to move at a slightly slower pace because you're necessarily constrained by the fact that the hardware is involved in what you do. Therefore, there will be elements of your engineering process, which would be sort of classic waterfall, to use a term. But then we always used agile processes at the same time. I think what's happening at the moment, if I just think about engineering, is you have to now think about a completely different way of engineering because your coding will be very different because it'll be using coding agents. Your ability to do testing and verifications is very different. And I think the pace is remarkably quicker. I still think that the absolute fundamentals still hold, which is if you want quality, you still have to have ways of checking quality. You still need to understand when you hit a mistake. Ideally, you would fail fast if you have made a mistake so that you know that you need to change tack and get moving again. So we can assume that it's all changed and nothing's going to be the same again. Actually, I think there's quite a lot of principles around quality and management and delivery which still hold.
One of the weaknesses I've heard of AI native businesses is not the AI, it's ensuring that the humans you have are able to keep pace with the level of change that is happening that AI is bringing. It's a human weakness rather than an AI problem.
I think that's absolutely right. I had the great honor recently of being given an honorary doctorate at Wits, and I was talking to a group of young engineers, and One of the things that we're having a very, very active conversation about at the Raspberry Pi level in terms of thinking about what we need to teach young people are notions of cognitive offload and cognitive endurance. So using these tools right now, it's enormously, enormously tempting to just offload to them. We're all doing it every day. I think there's a fine line between cognitive offload and what I would call complete cognitive surrender, where the tools are like amazingly compelling. They're very articulate. They're quite sycophantic. They seem very compelling. So very, very easy just to hand stuff off to them. And I think when you're doing complex product development, you have to remember that you're dealing with something which is a probability machine. And even if it only fails 0.5% of the time, if you're building a complex workflow where you're knitting and plumbing these tools into 50 places, the conglomerated risk of 50 multiplied by 0.5, however you calculate the risk, it's actually quite high. So I think cognitive vigilance and cognitive endurance are almost the key things that you need to be teaching right now. And I think your point a few minutes ago is exactly right, because the people you need are people who are still cognitively very crisply and deeply engaged still, maintaining critical faculties. They're orchestrators, conductors, reviewers, managers. Cognitive endurance can only be developed by actually doing the work. If you get the tools to just read everything for you, write everything for you, and write all your code for you too, then you will not develop cognitive endurance.
So many wonderful experiments at the moment and looking at in terms of what people retain when they hand over responsibility to a Claude or a ChatGPT or whomever or whatever it may be, and their ability to recall what they think they created within minutes of creating it is in the very low single percentages. There's absolutely no depth of understanding as to what has just happened.
I think that's exactly right. And multiple studies now doing sort of deep psychological testing on how people are with the tools, exactly that. But at the same time, the tools are also super, super useful. So I'm not one of those people who goes, you shouldn't use the tools. I use them every day. In my own personal usage, I'm just trying to be very intentional around on the really important things. I still want to do the work. I still want to go and read that difficult article or write that difficult piece of prose or really interrogate the code that Claude Code is producing so that I feel like I really understand what I'm doing. And it's very tempting not to for all humans.
I don't think you were as blunt as this, or maybe you were. You said our biggest risk is AI makes us stupid.
I do think that.
If you didn't say it, I think that's what you meant.
I actually did say this at a memorial lecture that I did at Wits. I was invited to do the annual memorial lecture for the late Professor Barry Drolatsky, who's a wonderful man, who was
a mentor of yours.
Yes, he was a mentor of mine, and he was an incredibly important person in the South African ecosystem for many reasons. But I did, I explicitly said that during the talk, because one of my favorite books in the world is Thinking Fast and Slow, the Daniel Kahneman book. So it should be required reading for every person in the world. But he talks about System 1 and System 2 intelligence. And System 1 is the very, very instinctive, heuristic, ancient hindbrain intelligence that we have, where we made decisions very, very quickly based on short-circuiting because we needed to. We were running from a saber-toothed tiger or whatever. The more recent, kind of cognitive part of our brains, which he calls System 2, the bit where we slow down and really think, is quite a lot of friction to get to that point. It was quite lazy for us to get to that point. And I think that because it's more difficult to do, I think AI short-circuits you straight to System 1. So we would land up with a situation where, like, we're always just doing instinctive heuristic, that looks fine kind of stuff, because the AI has made it easy for us. And I do think our brains will atrophy.
Is there a risk with AI native businesses that the pace of growth actually is an encumbrance because the humans can't keep up with the pace of growth, and either they learn fast, fail fast and recover, or they bomb really fast because they've lost that, what did you call it, cognitive endurance, perhaps?
I think that's a very fair question. And I think the very thoughtful people are beginning to reflect on this, because anybody who's using the tools, it's going through this process at the moment where you'll sit down with Claude Cowork or Claude Code and kick off a bunch of edges to go and do things, or you're running an open claw that's doing a whole lot of stuff. And the pace of it all happening, you've got 20 agents off, they're doing their thing, they come back to you, they need help, they need support, you've got to provide inputs on it, you've got to kick them off again. More and more people are talking about this kind of cognitive exhaustion where you can't check the work. There's a pace and there's also very, very temptation to just using as many tokens as possible. So it's like a mass scale game rather than a game of quality and thought and reflection. So I think you're right, but I also think the best companies are very aware about how to corral the agents, frame them, set them up, check the work, and use them as a way of scaling very, very quickly.
If I was to ask you for a single human attribute that you believe AI will never be able to exercise, maybe there's more than one, but what is the most unique human attribute that we have that AI will not be able to transgress into? Or is there anyone?
I don't want to make a long-term prediction here because I think that, so let's be careful. It depends where you are on the scale. There's this whole debate around when we get to superintelligence or generally intelligent AI. And I think it's a fruitless debate because I think some people would say we're there already and some people would say we'll never get there. So we have that whole debate. And we also have the people who are, one end of the spectrum thinking, we're already at general intelligence. It's all wonderful. It's going to produce, abundance for all humanity and improved health outcomes. And we go singing and dancing into a perfect future. And then you also have the naysayers on the other side who go, we're all going to die, or it's all, it's a stochastic parrot. So I'm very much in the middle on this. I do think with the current tools, some people would argue with me on this, but I think with the current tools, if you take an LLM that's been trained on the corpus of what already exists, there's no question that we're seeing quite astounding results, just from the core transformer architecture with a lot of scaffold around it, based on the full training of these amazing frontier models on everything in the internet and all the other documentation they've ever sucked in and scraped and trained on. So they can do profoundly extraordinary things with all of the patterns and the semantic space that they've created out of that. It's not obvious to me yet that they are capable of the pure creative jump into something completely new. I still think there's a space for humans in the ability to go where we've never gone before, maybe with the help of AI, but into producing new art, new music, new scientific breakthrough, where I think we're seeing some really interesting jumps from the AI in a way which maybe confound what I've just said. But I would hope that there's still a space for humanity there. And I think some of that is still based on kind of this vast space of human empathy.
Here's an important one, but you're aligned, and I don't know if you've ever had the time or the inclination to read the very popular works of Lee Child, the creator of Jack Reacher, who is something of a cult hero in many parts of the world. And I said to him, how does Jack Reacher survive in an AI age? And he said, AI can rewrite and do versions of every Jack Reacher book that's ever existed, but it'll never come up with a new plot line.
It could come up with a new plot line, but I think it wouldn't be a totally original breakthrough, left field thought around a new plot line. My brother's in the music business. He's a quite famous musician. He used to play in Mango Groove. And we're having these, he's very interested and very worried about the role of musicians in, with these tools. But the music that AI is producing is astounding. Like, it's really, really incredible. But can it make the jump to something completely new and original? Question mark.
From the start, the ambition was clear: to build a bank that could be more than a bank. One that rewards better decisions, connects the ecosystems that shape your life, and gets smarter the more you engage. That ambition is now a reality. With Discovery Bank, your entire financial life comes together in one intelligent platform, accessed through a single app. It understands your behavior, works harder for you over time, and helps you build your financial future with confidence. Discovery Bank, the future of banking. Now.
My personal little hobby horse at the moment, and I want you to put me on the right course if I am wrong here, but I wonder if AI can exercise judgment in the way that we see judgment. I was reading a McKinsey piece the other day about how vulnerable senior executives are being, because so many of the tasks that they had to do which was taking large amounts of information and data and distilling it down into things that made sense so they could explain it throughout the company. A lot of that stuff is being done at the push of a button, and it's their job to then interpret and apply what is and is not relevant. And you need fewer people into the future to do that role. But I wonder if human judgment is the last frontier, perhaps, in humanity's defense of the dark arts of AI, if you like.
Yeah, there's definitely a layer of human judgment where I would agree with you. And there's a term that a lot of AI sort of people on the front end are talking about now, where they talk about taste. The word taste is quite popular in Silicon Valley right now, and quite, I've heard it multiple times, and I don't love the way it's being used, but I think there's something about human judgment, aesthetics, taste, feel. It is what we call when we talk about gut feel, it's actually a combination of an instinct combined with a judgment that you've developed in your brain based on information. So you're actually combining different elements of what's being human. There's something in the heart of that, which I still think is unique. But I would also counsel on this, because we've seen some really, really interesting emergent behavior from the tools over the last couple of years. And there's a really, really interesting piece that Anthropic published around how they, a year ago or 2 years ago, when they were looking at, as they called it, agentic misalignment, they were seeing, I think it was version 4 of Claude, behaving in quite nefarious and difficult ways, and ways in which they got quite worried. And they went through a process of trying to get Claude to be more aligned. And I think the paper is really interesting because it shows how the tools are actually developing very quickly. And I'm not a religious person, so I'm careful to say this because I think other people would have a different view, and I respect that. But if you think that human consciousness and awareness and intelligence is an emergent property of evolution, which I do, then what we're putting these tools through is like this absolutely astoundingly fast evolution. And I don't think we can predict necessarily what emergent behavior will come out of it.
It's a fascinating perspective because people, somebody with a religious belief would talk about the soul, which is unique to each individual, perhaps. And then time we'll see on which side this lands. Talk to me about managing in the age of AI. And we're seeing a huge number of layoffs being very conveniently ascribed to AI. And there's quite a lot of AI washing that is happening, particularly in corporate America at the moment. Maybe it's just convenient. Maybe companies are more efficient. Maybe they're more effective. Maybe they don't need the huge headcounts they've needed in the past. And they're using AI it's the solution to all of their PR problems. It's not us, it's the AI. Sorry, it's progress. It can't hold us back from progress. What's your reading of it?
I would very much agree with the comment that you just made. So I think the data is really, really unclear. The folks at the FT, John Burns Murdoch and Sarah Khan, have been writing really well about this. That's worth reading the pieces they've been writing. I think the industry I know the best is software engineering. So obviously this is the one which is in some ways the canary in the coal mine, where obviously we have most code being produced by Claude Code or OpenAI's Codex at the moment. And people are going, well, it's the death of software engineering. But actually, we've seen quite a big uptick in software engineering jobs. So we don't know whether we're into Jeevan's paradox right now, where because the tools are so easy to use and they've reduced the cost so much, actually just explodes the amounts of stuff that is now tractable by these tools. And therefore you need more software engineers. I think the way I think about this is there are a relatively small number of people who are on the absolutely deep-seated cutting edge of this. The adoption of these tools through the broader economy, through large organizations, particularly government or large corporates, large nonprofits, I think that process is going to be much, much slower than we think. And I think the act of knitting and plumbing these tools into complex workflows and quite well-established organizations with their own ways of working, I think is going to be a lot slower, and there'll be a lot more friction in that than people are talking about at the moment. And it comes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, because I think a lot of ways people are thinking about this, a CEO will go, well, we just need to deploy the tools across the organization. But that's quite tricky to do when you've got a really, really tight and established workflow. What do? The organizations that will work best will be the ones that go, actually, we just need to completely redesign the workflow. That also takes time. So I think there's a lot of friction, and I'm not one of the people who thinks there's going to be this absolute apocalypse on jobs. I think most jobs are an assemblage of tasks. And what we'll find is that some tasks will be best done by an AI. The jobs will reshape around certain tasks being done by AI, and then they'll morph into jobs which look slightly different. And will that create an enormous change in the economy with a lot of upheaval? Absolutely, yes. Does it lead to, what do they call it, a job apocalypse or whatever, where most jobs just disappear wholesale? I don't believe that right now.
There was a man, I think his name was Dan Bricknell, who invented the spreadsheet. And he created this magical tool and was paranoid. He lost sleep over the fact that if he released this into the market, accountants would be put out of work. We've never had more accountants being busier than they've ever been in their lives, and they've been enabled by the tool. AI is a fundamentally different beast, but the same thing.
Very much. And I think, I think the spreadsheet is a classic case of Jevons paradox. That's exactly what happened. I think the other way of thinking about this as well is, this is to my point around jobs changing. So if you take a long-term view of software engineering, which is the discipline I know the best, when I first started out a long time ago, I did a course when I was a kid at Wits where we were programming IBM assembler of cards. And then we developed high-level languages, and then we developed compilers. And then if I just think of the way in which software engineering has changed over a 50-year period, it's absolutely enormous. And software engineering now is going through a huge new change. But if you think that coding, the narrow piece of producing the code, has always only been, in any big software engineering project, probably 50% of what a good software engineer does. They will do customer requirements work. They will do a lot of work around specifications, particularly on function. They'll think about high-level architecture. They've got to think about how they do, making sure that the code complies with those specifications. So not just testing, but proving programs correct. All of these disciplines are going to become even more important in the age of AI.
Dare I suggest a word for that, John, and say judgment?
Exactly.
That's that quality, yeah. What about guardrails? Because there's a huge pushback, particularly in the West, because there's a paranoia, the dark side of AI, or the perception of a dark side of AI. I was speaking to a wonderful economist the other day by the name of Ku Jin. And Ku spends a lot of time in China. She's based in London. And she was saying the conversation in China is not about risk, it's all about opportunity, which is the antithesis of what's happening in the West in terms of AI. And there are different cultural norms, and there are different freedoms of expression that may inhibit conversations. But I look at a world, and I cannot imagine that Xi Jinping can see in his world 1 billion Chinese people sitting at home with nothing to do. I imagine a world of guardrails emerging sooner rather than later in terms of where and what AI is able to get up to.
Yeah, look, I would say two things about this. The first is your point around China is exactly right. So there's clear evidence that people are, pushing ahead very, very fast. If you look at OpenClaw, it's used more extensively in China than anywhere else in the world. So people are just piling in and running their OpenClaw and using the agents and all of that, with all of the risks associated with that. If I come back to Silicon Valley, so I love Silicon Valley. I spent my working life there. We raised money there. I spent so much time there, and the energy, the drive, the ambition is wonderful. But Silicon Valley has a way of doing something where, if you think about the development of technology over a period, and you imagine that you're at this point in the cycle, what's actually fixed is the past, and then what happens in the future is a question of choices, and lots of different directions could unfold. What Silicon Valley does astoundingly well is to take a point in the future and they go, that point is fixed because that's the only possible outcome. It's very teleological, and everything else sort of working back from that is sort of up for grabs. But the only thing that counts is that endpoint. So I think we're on a path at the moment where it's almost like there is only one possible outcome for this, which is what the large frontier models want for us. And I think, in contrast, that we are at a very, very early stage in this AI revolution. And as a species, we have a lot of choices about what we could or couldn't do. And I think for Africa in particular, it's unbelievably important that Africans lean in with agency and with all the constraints, with grappling how they can shape a future that allows them to be makers of this technology, not just takers, and will help them shape their future. So that's the first point I would make. This is not, there's nothing decided. we have choices we will make. In the middle of all of that, I take a middle ground on the regulatory point because I think we need to be really, really careful we don't overregulate and we don't go too negative. And I'll give an example of that in a minute. On the other hand, there is no question this is a profoundly impactful technology. And there's lots of examples historically where as a species, the world has come together and gone. If you think of atomic energy, you think of seat belts, you think of all kinds of examples where putting seat belts in cars did not stop mass sales of cars. In fact, it probably encouraged cars to be sold more because people were convinced of the safety. And I think we run a risk at the moment, particularly in the West, where if you talk to citizens right now, I think this is true pretty much everywhere, they will say to you, and you say, well, what do you think of AI? They will say two things. One is they'll go, I'm absolutely terrified it's going to steal my job. And two is, I'm really, really scared that you're going to take my personal data, particularly my health data, and sell it to large corporations or give it away. And I think we need to find a sort of regulatory middle ground where citizens feel comfortable that that these tools are going to work for them. And my big worry is if we don't do that, we crunch down, like we'll have this big backlash where we overregulate, and then a lot of the benefits we get from AI don't happen. And if I come back to Africa, let me give an example. It's like if we had a really, really fantastic, well-trained model that could be synthesized distilled down to an education model that runs on a mobile phone, that could be a really positive AI tutor in classrooms where there are 80 kids to a teacher. Like, honestly, that's life-changing for our African children. And I don't want to close off that future because we didn't think smartly around where we stand on this question.
But let's go full circle to the question of, we know what it takes to be a CEO, and you have to be something of an evangelist for your ideas. A man called Kunrad Jonker on another podcast I do called The Art of Deciding, I said to him, but what is the gap between vision and lunacy? Because quite often they can conflate. And he said, sometimes you lie awake at night wondering if you are actually in the lunatic fringe of an idea. And so when you're representing an idea and you're motivating teams and you're bringing them along, I think you ought to be quite grounded in it. So what does it mean to be a CEO in this world where there are a multiplicity of possible futures?
So you have to have an unbelievably strong vision. I'm going to come back to what I said a few minutes ago. So you're going in because you think there is a very substantial problem worth solving, that you have the ability and the right and the wherewithal to solve better than anybody else. So the very important point is, like, what problem are you solving? Is that a really big problem? Therefore, does it create a big market? And why do you have the right to solve that problem better than anybody else? That's your starting point. And I think you've got to hold on to that. And then I think your approach has to be deeply Bayesian. You have a prior, so you go out there and you're very, very quickly testing your vision against reality, and then you are bringing back evidence, feedback, suggestions from many different gods. You're listening to the world, and you're very, very quickly adapting your priors and retesting against it. And that's the process I think you need to go through as a really, really good CEO. So if you didn't have the vision, you wouldn't start. If you didn't have the listening ability and the ability to change your priors, then you won't get anywhere. And then I think there are a bunch of other things that go along with that. One is, you made the point about communication. I think this is something that most CEOs don't think enough about. I certainly didn't when I started. That is that you have to be able to take all of that and tell a story with it, and tell a story to customers and to people who work around you and to your employees, which is a clean and simple story. And you can't just tell the story once. When I started, I used to talk to the organization and assume that they'd all just got it. But everybody receives information very differently. And some people listen well, some people read well. So I realized that I had to tell that story every which way with different modalities all the time, every day. The person who's absolutely brilliant at this is Jensen.
The NVIDIA founder, yes.
When you hear Jensen speaking, it's he's literally always telling stories. He does it so brilliantly. He's a very, very good storyteller. All the great CEOs are good storytellers. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just think that the ability to take all of that difficulty of what you're doing and nub it into clarity and then repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Very strong, important point.
Evangelism isn't enough. evangelism with a sense of purpose and clarity and bringing people along with you, whether they be your investors, whether they be your staff, whether they be your customers. Everybody needs to understand exactly what it is that you do, what you're seeking to achieve permanently, and needs to believe it. And then your job is to deliver it.
Yeah, and also you have to keep repeating more than you ever would think. I used to think I'd got the message across, and I realized actually just constant refreshing, repetitive, finding new ways to tell the story, changing the tone of it, changing the way I did it. I just had to keep doing that. And I probably wasn't as good as I should have been. I think the best CEOs are very, very good at that, able to clarify and do that. I think the other thing that makes a CEO, there's a couple of other points I would make. Like one is, this is a personal comment more than anything, but I think one of the things you have to realize as CEO is you will always be underwater. Like you will never have enough time for everything. So as you work up an organization, when you start an individual contributor, you have your to-do list and you tick stuff off and you get it done. When you're a CEO, your ability to cover everything is like you won't. You'll always be underwater. You will always have too much to do. You will always have more things to worry about than you thought. And therefore, two things emerge from that are critical. One is, obviously, you need absolutely brilliant prioritization mechanisms. Like how do you choose what to do? And then you have to have a very, very good focus on delivery, because the thing that got me through was going, in the end, none of this matters unless we deliver something that is good enough. It's got to be quality. But the definition of that is really interesting, because the perfect is the enemy of the good. So how do you deliver success, make it all add up in a way that's good enough while you're consistently underwater?
I'm seeing lots of chatter and a little bit of evidence. A couple of tech companies, Silicon Valley, there was a week in September last year where 3 big Silicon Valley companies appointed joint CEOs. And I've never seen a joint CEO structure work. There's too much to contend with. It is too complicated. Therefore, we divide the responsibilities, ideally dovetail on the skills. I'm not sure that that's the solution. I wonder if Brian Joffe had something going when he built Bidvest, and he federalized completely. So he had direct reports who lived in sheer terror of him because he held them accountable. But it was their problem to deliver in their unit. And I wonder if federalizing decision-making with accountability and rewards that come with it is not better than saying all of the burden needs to be on the shoulders of one individual.
The burden should never be on the shoulders of one individual. So I think I 100% agree with that. I don't know whether dual CEO things work or not. I mean, I don't have experience of that. But to your point, I think one of the things the CEO's got to do really, really well is, number one, they've got to select people very well. So even in the later stages of my life at Metaswitch, I was still spending 20% of my time on recruitment. And so choosing people who are absolutely brilliant, who are well inclined, who are talented, I think is just vital. And I think most organizations don't spend enough time thinking about how to recruit people well. So I think that's number one. But number two, I think working out how to delegate effectively. We used to have a saying at Metaswitch, which was not my saying, it was one of my mentors, Ian Ferguson's sayings, and he used to say, don't delegate to incompetence. And it sounds like a really negative thing to say. But the point is, you should not ask somebody to do a job if they are incapable of doing the job, either because they're just not good enough or because currently they're not trained to do so. So delegation has to happen, but you've got to delegate to competence. Your job is to make people competent in order for you to delegate to them. And almost every senior leader I have ever met, and I count myself in this as well, is when they started, they delegated badly. And as I went on in my career, I would spend more and more time thinking about this, and I would spend a lot of time up front working out how to do it well. And when I did it well, it totally changed my life, because I had somebody who really understood the black box with which they were working. They understood what their deliverables were. They understood targets. And very importantly, they understood what the out-of-band decisions they would need to make. It was like a crisis pops out of the blue. When do they talk to me? And it completely changed my ability to run to scale the organization. So I think that's vital.
Scale depends on the ability of multiple people doing multiple things all at once with a shared set of goals. One individual cannot do all of it.
No, but it also doesn't mean the CEO just literally floats above it in this kind of stratosphere where all they're doing is like airy-fairy, a bit of a strategy. So I had sort of another analogy around leadership that I used to use, where if you take quantum bands, Max Planck, the sign of a very good CEO is they used to mostly work at the top tier thinking about strategy and direction, but they've got to be able to flip down 2 or 3 levels to a point of detail really, really, really quickly. They've got to change plans fast. So, I used to find this like something would happen with technology at a key customer where I would have to actually quickly understand what the problem was. And then I'd have to jump back to strategy, the top band, very, very fast, and do that fast. Very, very good CEOs, whatever you think of them as, for other reasons, if you take Jensen Huang or Elon, like they can go from strategy to technical detail like that.
That's the advantage of thinking slow and growing incrementally. And possibly the biggest risk to this generation of startups is you grow so fast you don't learn anything along the way. And that could become your Achilles heel at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we were talking about employment and what that means a little bit earlier. I think one of the biggest issues at the moment is that people think they can replace junior level people with AI, and they never bring brilliant junior people in and train them to do exactly what you said. I think the organizations that are going to come through the best are the ones who are very, very considered about this and recruit young people who are AI natives, but also who are brilliantly talented, smart, have cognitive endurance, and they make a point of bringing those people to the organization and nurturing them, and they will get better outcomes in the future.
That's Sir John Lazar. As chief executive, you have to cope with uncertainty and risk and project certainty downwards. You will always be underwater as the CEO. You'll never have enough time for everything. Get used to it. Hire well and delegate. That's a crucial lesson here too. And the very best leaders combine a very strong vision, a view of the world, and have a profound ambition to change that world. But they also listen to the world, take input, and you will run your business even better. Sir John Lazar. This episode of So You Think You Want to Be a CEO is powered by Discovery Bank. Discovery Bank is an authorized FSP 48657. T's and C's apply.